Sir, your translator is lying.
What, lying?
No, that's not true.
What's going on here?
She's lying.
Your translator is lying. The Maid Toddler warns a billionaire before a German deal. She was 3 years old. But on one Tuesday morning, in the middle of a multi-million-dollar business deal between two of the most powerful men in the room, she opened her tiny mouth and said something that stopped everything cold. She pointed her small finger at a man in a sharp suit. And she said, very clearly, very simply, the way only children can say things that cut straight to the bone. He's lying. The room went silent. The billionaire, a 34-year-old self-made man who had built his empire from nothing, who had survived betrayals that would have destroyed most men, who had learned to read people the way others read books, he froze. Not because he was scared, but because something deep inside him believed her. A toddler, a little girl who belonged to the maid. A child who had no reason to be in that room, no reason to say those words, no reason to know anything about the man standing across the table with a leather briefcase and a practiced smile. But she said it anyway. He's lying. And what happened next, what unraveled over the next 48 hours, would change everything. The deal, the money, the man, and the quiet, invisible woman who had been cleaning floors in that mansion for 3 years, never asking for anything, never demanding to be seen. This is not just a story about business. This is a story about truth. About how truth sometimes comes from the most unexpected places, from the smallest voices, from the most overlooked people, from a child who had no agenda, no fear, and no reason to stay silent. This is a story about a woman who worked in silence and a little girl who spoke when no one else could. And it is a story about a man, powerful, successful, guarded, who almost made the worst mistake of his life because he trusted the wrong person. Almost. Stay with me, because before this story ends, you are going to feel something. Maybe you will feel anger. Maybe you will feel relief. Maybe you will see yourself in one of these people, the one who stayed quiet, the one who was betrayed, or the one who finally listened. Whatever you feel it fully, because this story is real in the way that matters most. It is real in the heart. And it starts the way all the best stories start, not with power, not with money, not with grand speeches in glass towers. It starts with a little girl, a stuffed bear, and a word that nobody expected. He's lying. Let's go back to the beginning. Her name was Amara. She was 31 years old, though most days she felt older. Not in a bitter way. In the way that comes from carrying real weight, the kind of weight that doesn't show on your face until someone looks closely enough. She had come to the United States 7 years ago. She had left behind everything she knew, her village, her language, her mother's kitchen, the sound of rain on a tin roof. She had packed one bag and one dream and crossed an ocean with them both. The dream was simple. Give her daughter a better life. That was it. No mansions. No fame. No corner office. Just a life where her daughter could go to school without fear, eat without worry, and sleep without hearing the sounds that had haunted Amara's own childhood. When she found the job, a live-in maid position at the home of Marcus Hale, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Marcus Hale was not the kind of man you forgot easily. He was 34, tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to process the world faster than most people could speak. He had built his technology company from a garage. Literally a garage. Second-hand computers, ramen noodles, and 18-hour days. By the time he was 27, he was worth $40 million. By the time Amara started working for him, that number had tripled. He was not cruel. That was the first thing Amara noticed. She had worked for cruel employers before. She knew what that felt like. The tone in the voice, the way they looked through you rather than at you, the small humiliations that were never quite illegal but always intentional.
Marcus was not like that.
He was distant, focused. He existed inside his work the way some people exist inside a shell, not to keep others out, but because the work was simply everything to him. He said good morning when he saw her. He paid on time. He never raised his voice. But he didn't really see her either. She was furniture to him. Useful, present, invisible. And Amara, she had made peace with that.
She wasn't there to be seen.
She was there to work,
To save.
to build something small and steady for the little girl who toddled behind her everywhere she went. That little girl was Lily, 3 years old. Enormous brown eyes. A laugh that sounded like bells rolling down a hill. She had learned to walk in this house. She had spoken her first full sentence in this kitchen. She had grown up in the quiet spaces of Marcus Hale's mansion, playing between the furniture legs, drawing on paper in the corner of rooms, watching the world with those enormous, serious eyes. Lily was quiet, unusually quiet for a child her age. Not sad, never sad. Just observant. She would sit for long stretches, simply watching people, watching faces, watching hands, watching the way mouths moved and eyes shifted and shoulders tensed. Amara sometimes wondered what her daughter saw, what those little eyes were filing away, what she understood that she couldn't yet put into words. She would find out soon enough. Marcus's business had been growing in a new direction that year. He was expanding into Europe, specifically into Germany, where a large manufacturing firm had reached out about a partnership. The deal was worth hundreds of millions. It would change the shape of his company entirely. The lead representative from the German side was a man named Victor Stahl. He was 30 years old, polished, educated, with a smooth way of speaking and an even smoother way of smiling. He spoke English well, very well, but the detailed contract negotiations required precise translation. Legal terms, technical language, numbers that needed to mean exactly what they said, and nothing else. Marcus had hired a translator, a professional, highly recommended, a man named Daniel Cross, who had been translating in high-stakes corporate settings for years. His resume was impeccable. His references were glowing. He wore the kind of suits that cost more than Amara made in a month and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been doubted. The meetings were scheduled to take place over 3 days at the house. Marcus preferred that, his own space, his own ground, his own coffee. Amara would be there, of course, moving quietly, refilling water glasses, keeping the kitchen running, being invisible the way she always was. And Lily would be nearby, in the small adjoining room that Amara had set up as a little play corner during the workdays. Close enough to hear her mother's footsteps. Far enough not to be a disturbance. Or so everyone thought. The first day of meetings went smoothly. Marcus and Victor shook hands. Daniel translated. Papers were reviewed. Numbers were discussed. Everyone smiled at the right moments. The coffee was good. The weather outside was pleasant. Everything felt right. That night, Amara cleaned up the meeting room. She stacked papers, straightened chairs, wiped the long table. Lily sat in the corner of the room, dragging a crayon slowly across a piece of paper, her brow furrowed in concentration. Amara glanced at her daughter. Lily was drawing something. 3 figures. One was tall. One was shorter. One was very small. "Who is that?" Amara asked softly, pointing at the tallest figure. Lily looked up. Her brown eyes were steady and calm. "The man who talks wrong," she said. Amara stared at her. "What do you mean, baby?" But Lily had already looked back down at her drawing, dragging the crayon again, adding a dark scribble over the tallest figure. Amara didn't think much of it then. Children said strange things. They saw the world through a lens that didn't always match reality. She finished cleaning and carried Lily to bed. But that night, she lay awake longer than usual. The man who talks wrong. What did that mean?
She didn't know.
Not yet. The second day of meetings arrived with gray skies and the smell of rain. Amara woke early, as she always did. She made coffee first, the expensive kind that Marcus preferred, measured carefully, brewed slowly. She set out the breakfast things. She pressed her uniform and checked on Lily, who was still sleeping with one arm wrapped around her stuffed bear and her mouth slightly open. She looked so small, so completely unaware of the world turning outside those walls. Amara smoothed the blanket over her daughter's shoulder and went back to work. By 9 in the morning, the men had arrived. Victor Stahl came through the front door with the polished ease of someone who is always comfortable, always welcome, always exactly where he intended to be. He shook Marcus's hand with both of his. He complimented the house. He accepted the coffee with a gracious nod. Daniel Cross came in just behind him. Same suit as yesterday, different tie. He set his leather bag on the table with a quiet confidence that said he had done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. Marcus looked sharper today, more focused. Amara noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly from the edges of the room. There was something in his jaw, in the way his eyes moved when he reviewed the papers on the table. He was close to something that mattered a great deal to him. She could feel it in the air of the room. The meeting began, and Amara moved in and out. Water, coffee, a quiet presence that nobody tracked.
She was good at this.
She had made herself good at this. The art of being necessary without being noticed. Lily was in the play corner, the door half open. She had her crayons and her paper and her stuffed bear. She was content. The men talked. Daniel translated. Victor listened and responded. Papers moved back and forth across the table. Numbers were revised. Terms were discussed. Everything looked professional.
Clean.
Legitimate. But something had shifted. Amara couldn't name it at first. It was a feeling more than a thought, something sitting wrong, like a picture hung at a slight angle that you notice without realizing you've noticed. She refilled Victor's water glass and glanced up at his face as she stepped back. He was smiling, but his smile came a half-second too early, before Daniel had finished translating Marcus's last statement, as if he already knew what was being said before it was said. Amara moved back to the kitchen. She told herself it meant nothing. Maybe Victor understood more English than he let on. Maybe he was simply a fast reader of rooms. Maybe she was looking for things that weren't there. She washed cups. She straightened things. She stayed busy. 20 minutes passed. Then she heard it. A small sound from the direction of the meeting room. Not a crash, not an argument, just a tiny, clear voice cutting through the low murmur of adult conversation. He's lying. Amara dropped the dish towel. She moved fast, arriving at the doorway in seconds. What she saw stopped her cold. Lily was standing in the entrance to the meeting room. She had left the play corner, without Amara hearing. She was barefoot, still in her little yellow pajamas, holding her stuffed bear by one worn ear. Her brown eyes were fixed, completely fixed, on Daniel Cross. And she had said those words. He's lying. The room had gone very still. Marcus was frozen in his chair, staring at the child. Victor had leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Daniel Cross had gone perfectly, completely still, the kind of stillness that isn't relaxed. It was the stillness of someone calculating. Lily. Amara crossed the room quickly, reaching for her daughter's hand. I'm so sorry. She wandered in. I'll take her. Wait. It was Marcus's voice.
Low.
Controlled. But something underneath it, something alert, something she had never heard from him before.
He was looking at Lily.
Lily was still looking at Daniel. What did you say, sweetheart? Marcus asked. His voice was gentle. Careful. The way you speak to something fragile that you don't want to startle. Lily turned her enormous brown eyes to Marcus. She pointed at Daniel again. He says different words, she said. Not the same ones. Silence. Daniel let out a small, practiced laugh. Children, he said smoothly. They say the most imaginative things. But Marcus wasn't laughing. He was watching Lily. And Lily, 3 years old, holding her stuffed bear, completely unaware of the weight of the moment, looked back at Daniel one more time, and pressed her lips together the way she did when she had said everything she needed to say. Amara scooped her daughter up. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "It won't happen again." She carried Lily out of the room. But as she passed through the doorway, she glanced back. Marcus was still sitting very still. His eyes had moved from Lily to Daniel. And the expression on his face, she had never seen it before. Not in 3 years of working in his house. Not in 3 years of watching him navigate deals and deadlines and difficult people. It was the look of a man who had just heard something he couldn't unhear. The meeting ended early that day. No reason was given. Marcus simply said he needed time to review some things, and they would reconvene the next morning. Victor left smoothly. Daniel left smoothly. The house went quiet, and Marcus sat alone at the long table for a very long time. Amara could see him from the kitchen doorway, just sitting there, papers in front of him, not reading them, just thinking. She didn't disturb him, but she thought about her daughter's words all evening. He says different words, not the same ones. How would a 3-year-old know that? How would a child who couldn't yet read, who had never studied German, who spent her days with crayons and stuffed animals, how would she know that a professional translator was saying something different than what was being said? Amara didn't have the answer, but she was beginning to think there was something real behind those small, simple words. And she was beginning to understand that invisible people sometimes see everything. That night, the house felt different. Amara noticed it the way she noticed everything, in the quality of the silence. Not the comfortable silence of a house settling into evening, but something tighter. Something held. Marcus didn't eat dinner. She had prepared a simple meal and left it covered on the counter, and when she checked at 9 o'clock, it was still there, untouched. She packed it away quietly and went about the rest of her routine. Lily was bathed and in bed by 7:30, the stuffed bear tucked in beside her. She had said nothing more about the meeting room or the man with the wrong words. She had eaten her dinner happily, talked about a butterfly she'd seen near the window, and fallen asleep mid-sentence the way only very small children can. Amara watched her sleep for a long moment. There was something about Lily's certainty that stayed with her. Children didn't hedge. They didn't qualify. They didn't think about consequences before they spoke. When Lily said something, it was because she had seen something, processed it in that quiet, observant way of hers, and decided it was true. He says different words, not the same ones. Amara replayed it again and again. She herself spoke 3 languages. She had grown up with her mother's tongue, learned French in school, and acquired English through necessity and hard work over 7 years. She understood intimately what it felt like when translation was off, that slight wrongness like a note played just a fraction flat. You didn't always know exactly what was wrong. You just knew something was. But she had not been close enough during the meetings to hear the translations closely. She had moved in and out, keeping to the edges, keeping herself invisible. Lily had been in the play corner. The play corner whose half-open door faced directly toward the meeting table. And Lily, quiet, watchful, always listening, had been there for hours. Amara's chest tightened. She went to her own small room and sat on the edge of her bed. She pressed her hands together. She thought carefully. She was the maid. That was the reality she lived inside. She cleaned floors and made coffee and existed at the margins of a life that wasn't hers. She had no business involving herself in a $100 million deal. She had no credentials, no standing, no voice that would be taken seriously in that boardroom world. And yet, her daughter had walked into that room and said something that had made a billionaire go very still. That meant something. The question was what? The next morning came cool and clear. Amara rose early again, made the coffee, set the table, moved through the familiar rhythms of the house. When Marcus came down, he looked like a man who had not slept. His eyes were sharp, sharper than usual, even, but the skin beneath them was tired. He poured his own coffee before she could reach for the carafe. He stood at the kitchen counter and drank it standing up. He didn't say good morning. He stood there for a moment, looking out the window at the backyard, at the oak tree that was just beginning to show new leaves. Then, quietly, without turning around, he said, "Your daughter, Lily." Amara went still. "Yes, sir. She's been in the house during the meetings. In the play corner, yes. I keep her close. She's usually very quiet. I'm sorry about yesterday, it won't." "Does she speak German?" The question landed softly, but it hit hard. Amara blinked.
No.
"She's 3. Marcus nodded slowly, still not turning around. "Does she speak any language other than English?" "A few words of mine."
From home.
But no, nothing formal. Nothing she could have learned from. She said he was lying. Still soft. Still careful. She said he was saying different words. "She's a child. Children say. I know what children say." He turned now, and he looked at Amara directly, really looked at her in a way that he never had before in 3 years. "I also know what my gut says. And right now those two things are saying the same thing." Amara held his gaze.
She didn't speak.
"I need you to tell me," he said, "if you noticed anything. Anything at all. During any of the meetings. Anything that felt wrong." She thought about Victor's smile coming half a second too early. The way Daniel's shoulders had shifted on the second day when certain papers were pushed across the table. Small things. Invisible things. The kinds of things only someone watching from the edges would catch. But she was the maid. And this was $100 million deal. And she had a daughter to protect, and a job that kept a roof over that daughter's head. She looked at the man in front of her. This man who had never once in 3 years looked at her the way he was looking at her now, and she made a decision. "Victor smiled," she said slowly. "Yesterday." Before Daniel finished translating. "He smiled like he already knew what you had said." Marcus didn't react visibly, but something in his eyes clicked. "Anything else?" When the third set of papers came out, the ones with the liability clauses, Daniel adjusted how he was sitting. He leaned back slightly, like he was creating distance. Silence.
"And one more thing," she said.
She wasn't sure why she kept going. Maybe because he was listening. Maybe because in 3 years, nobody had listened like this. On the first night, after everyone left, Lily drew a picture. 3 figures. She put a dark scribble over the tallest one.
She paused.
She called him the man who talks wrong. Marcus set his coffee cup down very carefully. He looked at the window again. At the oak tree. At the new leaves. "The meeting is at 10, he said. "I need you to do something for me." She waited. "I need you to stay in the room." At 9:55, Amara set up a small station near the window of the meeting room. She had a tray with coffee cups and a water pitcher. She had a small cloth for wiping surfaces. She had everything she needed to look exactly like what she was, a maid doing her job in the background. But Marcus had asked her to stay. And he had asked her to listen. Not with any grand instructions or elaborate plan. Just 3 words, quiet as a stone dropped into still water. Stay and listen. She understood. Victor arrived at 10 exactly. Daniel followed. They came in the way they always did. Polished, professional, ready. Victor shook hands with Marcus. Daniel opened his bag and arranged his notes on the table. The meeting began. Amara stood near the window. She refilled cups when they emptied. She moved slowly, deliberately, giving herself reasons to be near different parts of the table at different moments. And she listened, not to the English. She already knew what Marcus was saying. She listened to the German. She did not speak German. She had never studied it. But she had lived with language her whole life. She understood its music, its rhythm, the way meaning could shift depending on tone and emphasis. She could not translate the words. But she could feel when the texture of one language didn't match the texture of another. Daniel was speaking too smoothly. That was the first thing she felt. There was no hesitation, no searching, the kind of natural pause that even excellent translators have when a concept is complex. He moved like someone reciting something practiced, something memorized. And when Marcus said something complicated, a nuanced point about intellectual property protections, Daniel's German lasted about 4 seconds. That sentence, in English, had been 30 words long. Amara's hands stilled on the water pitcher. She kept her face completely neutral. She moved to the far side of the table and refilled Victor's glass without meeting anyone's eyes. Victor received Daniel's short response. He smiled. He nodded. He said something in German that sounded like agreement. But something in Victor's eyes was off. There was a glimmer there, not the warmth of genuine agreement, but the quick brightness of someone who has gotten something they wanted without the other party realizing it. And Marcus, brilliant, careful Marcus, was nodding along. Because he was trusting the translation. Because he had no reason not to. Amara set the pitcher down. Her heart was beating harder now. She thought about Lily. 3 years old, sitting in the play corner with her crayons, listening to the room the way she always listened, without agenda, without pretense, just pure, clean observation. She had heard something that the adults had missed. Something in the pattern of the sounds. Something in the rhythm of words that didn't match. He says different words, not the same ones. She was right. Amara knew it now the way she knew it when rain was coming before the clouds arrived. She didn't have proof. She couldn't point to a specific mistranslated phrase and name it. But she knew. The question was what to do about it. She moved back toward the window and stood very still, her hands folded in front of her, and she thought. The meeting was at a critical point. Marcus had just finished laying out the terms he considered non-negotiable, terms that protected his company's core technology from being replicated or reverse-engineered by the German firm. These were the terms that his lawyers had spent months crafting. The terms that made this deal safe for him. If those terms were being mistranslated, softened, or omitted, or reworded to mean something less binding, then Marcus was walking into an agreement that would leave him completely exposed. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Years of work. His company's most valuable intellectual property. All of it at risk. Because he trusted a man in a good suit who smiled at the right moments. Amara pressed her lips together. And then she did something she had never done in 3 years. She spoke. Mr. Hale. Her voice was quiet. Even. It did not shake. Every head in the room turned toward her. Marcus looked at her. His expression gave nothing away. Could I ask, and I apologize for the interruption, but could I ask Mr. Stahl directly, in whatever language he prefers, what his understanding is of the intellectual property clauses? Just to confirm we are all aligned. Silence. A long, suspended silence. Daniel Cross turned to look at her. His face was perfectly composed. But behind his eyes, something flickered. Something fast and dark, like a shadow moving under shallow water. Victor's expression had become very still. Marcus looked at Amara for a moment. Then he looked at Victor. That's a reasonable clarification, Marcus said calmly. Victor, in your own words, what is your understanding of the IP protection terms we just discussed? Victor glanced at Daniel. Just for a fraction of a second. But everyone in the room saw it. Victor looked back at Marcus. He spoke in careful, measured English, accented but clear. The terms are flexible. Depending on market conditions and shared development needs, yes. Marcus's face didn't move. But something behind his eyes went absolutely, completely cold. Flexible. That was not what Marcus had said. Not even close. The terms he had presented were the opposite of flexible. They were iron. They were built to be unbreakable. They were the spine of the entire agreement. If Victor believed they were flexible, it was because he had been told they were flexible. By his translator. The room was very, very quiet. And I want to pause here for just a moment, because I think some of you watching this right now are feeling something in your chest. Something tight. Something that happens when you watch someone be betrayed, and you see it coming before they do. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from right now. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if this story is touching you, if you feel something in it, subscribe and leave your experience in the comments. Have you ever trusted the wrong person? Have you ever been the one who nobody listened to until it was almost too late? Share it. Your story matters here. Because this story, this moment, it's about more than a business deal. It's about who we trust.
And why?
And what happens when the wrong person gets access to that trust. And for Marcus Hale, that answer was about to become very, very clear. Marcus asked Victor and Daniel to wait in the study. He did it calmly,
Politely.
with the same even, controlled voice he used for everything. He said he needed to make a brief call to his legal team. He apologized for the inconvenience. He offered more coffee. Victor nodded graciously. Daniel nodded and said, of course, take all the time needed. They left the room. And then it was just Marcus and Amara. She stood near the window, hands at her sides, waiting for whatever came next. She had interrupted $100 million meeting. She had stepped far outside every boundary that defined her place in this house, in this world, in the invisible space she had carefully maintained for 3 years. She did not know what Marcus was going to say. She was prepared for many things. She was not fully prepared for what he actually did. He sat down at the table. He put his hands flat on the surface, looked at the papers in front of him, and said, very quietly, thank you. She blinked. I need 20 minutes, he said. And I need to ask you something. Of course. He looked up. Would you be willing to be in the room when I confront them?
Not to say anything.
Just to be there. She understood what he was asking. He wanted a witness. He wanted someone who had seen what she had seen, who had heard what she had heard, who could confirm, if it ever came to that, what had happened in this room over the past 2 days. Yes, she said. He nodded. He picked up his phone and made calls. To his lawyer. To a contact he had in Germany. A business associate who spoke both English and German fluently and who owed Marcus a favor or two. He arranged a video call. It would take 15 minutes to set up. While he waited, he pulled out the meeting notes. He went through them page by page. He had been taking his own notes throughout the sessions, key terms, numbers, specific language. Now he was looking at them differently. Now he was reading them the way a man reads a map when he suspects he's been given wrong directions. Amara stood quietly. She did not try to fill the silence. This was something she was good at. Being present without demanding anything from the space. After a moment, Marcus looked up again. Not at the papers. At her. Lily, he said. She's 3. Yes. She's here every day. I keep her close. I didn't have another option. I know it's not. It's fine. He said it simply, without edge. She's been in this house since she was born, essentially. Since she was 5 months old. He looked at the table again. Something passed across his face, something she couldn't read, something that was almost recognition. She's been watching, this whole time. She always watches. She's always been that way. He was quiet for a moment. Children see things, he said. Not a question. Just a thought spoken out loud. The way people speak when they're processing something that has rearranged their understanding of the world. They do, Amara said. They don't know yet that they're supposed to pretend they don't. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she thought she saw something new in his expression. Not just gratitude. Something closer to understanding. Or maybe to shame, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when you realize how long you've been looking past something that was always right in front of you. 15 minutes later, his German contact was on a laptop screen in the corner of the meeting room. The man was sharp, businesslike, and entirely trustworthy. Marcus had verified that twice over. He had been briefed quickly on what was needed. Victor and Daniel were brought back in. Marcus set a recorder on the table. He told them, calmly, without accusation, that he wanted to do a final alignment check before signing anything. Standard procedure. He hoped they understood. Victor's smile was thinner now. Daniel's posture was carefully relaxed. The review began. Marcus read from the key IP protection clauses, the non-negotiable terms, the ones he had spent 6 months crafting with his lawyers. He read them aloud. He asked Daniel to translate them. Daniel translated. And Marcus's contact, listening through the laptop in the corner, made a small note on the pad in front of him. Then Marcus asked his contact, on video, to translate the same clauses directly. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Amara had ever heard. Because the two translations were not the same. Not even close. Where Marcus had said the IP terms were absolute and irrevocable, Daniel had translated them as conditional on mutual agreement. Where Marcus had said the German firm had zero right to replicate or adapt the core technology, Daniel had translated it as a shared development arrangement with negotiable terms. The entire foundation of the deal had been quietly, systematically rewritten in translation. If those papers had been signed, Marcus would have handed his company's most valuable technology to a competitor, legally, irrevocably, in exchange for a fraction of what it was worth. Victor Stahl leaned back in his chair. He no longer smiled. Daniel Cross sat very still. That same calculated stillness that Amara had seen when Lily had pointed at him and said those 3 words. Marcus looked at Daniel. "How long?" Marcus asked. Just those 2 words. Flat and direct. Daniel said nothing. "How long have you been working with them?" Still nothing. Amara stood near the window and watched the whole careful structure of Daniel's performance collapse. Not dramatically, not in a moment of breakdown or confession, but slowly. Like a building whose supports have been quietly cut, finally acknowledging gravity. Victor said something in German. Quiet and controlled. Marcus's contact translated it immediately. "This is a misunderstanding. We should speak with our respective legal teams." Marcus stood up. "Get out of my house," he said. Still calm. Still controlled. But with something underneath it, something cold and final and absolutely certain. They left. And when the door closed, and the house went quiet, and the oak tree in the backyard moved slightly in the morning wind, Marcus stood at the head of the empty table and pressed his hands flat against the surface. He breathed. Just breathed. And Amara stood near the window and gave him the silence he needed. After Victor and Daniel were gone, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet. More like the air after a storm has passed, but before the sky has fully cleared. That in-between place where everything is still, but the stillness feels new and fragile. Marcus sat back down at the table.
He didn't speak for a while.
He looked at the papers in front of him, the translated clauses, the notes, the agreements that had nearly been signed, and he sat with all of it. Amara had seen people crumble in moments like this. She had seen people explode. She had seen people shut down entirely, building walls so fast it was like watching something freeze over in real time. Marcus did none of those things. He was very still. And in that stillness, Amara could see, just barely, the weight of what had almost happened sitting on his shoulders. Hundreds of millions. Years of work. The company he had built from nothing, from a garage, from ramen and 18-hour days. It had almost been handed over to people who never deserved it, through a betrayal he never saw coming. Almost. "How long have you been here?" he asked. Not as an accusation. As if he genuinely wanted to know.
3 years, she said.
Almost 4. He nodded slowly. He turned slightly in his chair so he could look at her without craning his neck. "And in that time, did anything else ever seem wrong to you?"
"Here in the house."
"With anyone?" She thought carefully before answering.
"No."
"Nothing like this. But you notice small things." "I notice everything," she said. It came out more directly than she intended. But it was true. It's part of the job. You have to, when you work in someone else's space. You learn to read the room. He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought about that," he said. And she could tell from the way he said it, from the small pause before the words, that he meant it genuinely. That he was not being polite or performative. He was actually reckoning with something. With the fact that there had been someone in this house, moving through it quietly, reading every small shift in energy and atmosphere, and he had never once considered what that person might see. "Your daughter," he said. Amara braced herself slightly, though she kept her face calm. "She's remarkable," he said. The word landed quietly, not with fanfare, not with the dramatic weight of a movie moment. Just quietly, honestly, the way real recognition often comes, small and steady and unmistakable. "She's 3, Amara said. A reflex. A habit. The habit of minimizing, of keeping Lily safely tucked away from the scrutiny of the world." "I know how old she is," Marcus said. "And I know what she said. And I know that what she said is the reason I still have a company." Amara looked at her hands. She didn't know what to say to that. "She learned that from you," he said. "The watching. The listening. She learned to see the world that way, because you see the world that way." The words hit her somewhere deep and unexpected. She had spent 3 years in this house telling herself that Lily's presence was not a burden, but also working very hard to make sure Lily was never a presence at all. Invisible mother. Invisible child. Moving through someone else's life, leaving no trace. And now a man was sitting in front of her telling her that the most invisible person in this house had saved everything. She felt the back of her eyes go warm. She did not let herself cry. She had learned over years and continents and oceans of hard living to keep that particular door closed in public. But she felt it, the way you feel a wave before it reaches you. "I want to know," Marcus said, "how long this had been in place." He was thinking out loud now more than asking her. His mind was already moving, pulling back through the weeks of preparation, the recommendations, the background check that had been run on Daniel Cross, the references that had been verified. He was rearranging what he knew in the light of what he had just discovered. Daniel had been connected to Victor Stahl's firm before being hired as the translator. That much became clear over the next few hours as Marcus worked the phone, talking to his lawyers, talking to his German contact, pulling on threads. The betrayal had been planned, not improvised. Daniel had been placed deliberately, recommended through a chain of people who had been very carefully chosen for their distance from obvious suspicion. He had a clean record, perfect credentials, genuine professional history in other settings. He had not been hired to be a villain in a single deal. He had been built, over time, to be someone who could be trusted. That was the part that sat heaviest. Not the betrayal itself. Marcus had been betrayed before. Anyone who builds something real gets betrayed eventually. It is one of the ugly truths of building things in the world. What sat heaviest was the precision of it, the patience, the work that had gone into making Daniel Cross seem impossible to doubt. And then a 3-year-old had walked into the room in her yellow pajamas and said he's lying, and the whole architecture of that deception had cracked. Not because of sophisticated analysis. Not because of technology or investigation or the high-priced expertise of lawyers and consultants. Because of instinct. Pure, clean, uncorrupted instinct. Amara thought about that as the afternoon light shifted through the windows and Marcus made call after call at the far end of the room. She thought about what instinct really is, where it comes from, what it's made of. She thought about how children have it in full before the world begins to teach them to doubt it. Before they learn that some things aren't their business. Before they learn to be quiet in rooms where their silence is expected. Lily hadn't learned those lessons yet. And because she hadn't, she had seen clearly where everyone else had been looking away. Amara said a quiet, private word of gratitude. Not to anyone in the room. Just into the space. Just to whatever it is that keeps the smallest people safe and makes their voices carry further than they should. Then she went back to work. Because the house still needed running. Because that was her job. Because some things stay the same even when everything else changes. 3 days after Victor and Daniel left, the full picture emerged. Marcus's legal team and a private investigator he had hired worked fast. They pulled records, cross-referenced connections, traced the chain of referrals that had led to Daniel Cross being hired as the translator for these negotiations. What they found was worse than Marcus had expected. Daniel Cross had been working with Victor Stahl's parent company for over a year before the negotiations began. He had been embedded, that was the word the investigator used, and it was the right word, embedded in the professional networks adjacent to Marcus's company. He had attended 2 industry conferences where Marcus's representatives were present. He had cultivated a reference relationship with someone in Marcus's extended network. He had been patient, methodical, invisible in his preparation. He had spent a year building the infrastructure to betray someone who had never met him. And the terms he had been secretly negotiating, through the mistranslations, through the quiet rewriting of every protection Marcus had built, would have given Victor Stahl's company full licensing access to Marcus's core technology for a 15-year period at a fixed fee that would have been, in 2 years' time, worth less than 10 cents on the dollar. The technology, the actual proprietary system at the heart of Marcus's company, was projected to grow in value by nearly 800% over the next decade based on current market trajectory. Victor's company would have controlled it for 15 years. For almost nothing. Marcus sat with that number for a long time. 800% growth. 15 years. Locked into an agreement that his own signature would have made unbreakable. He had built his company from nothing. He had survived the early years when survival was genuinely uncertain, when payroll was tight and investors were skeptical, and there were weeks when he wasn't sure the whole thing would make it to the next quarter. He had made sacrifices that cost him relationships, sleep, years of his life that he would never get back. All of that, everything he had built, had been one pen stroke away from being quietly stolen. By a man in a good suit with a practiced smile and a year's worth of patient preparation. And the only thing that had stopped it was a little girl in yellow pajamas. Marcus went quiet after he received the full report. Not the controlled, working quiet of a man processing information and planning next steps. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes when the full weight of something lands on you all at once, after you've been holding it off with busyness and action and forward movement. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the afternoon.
He went outside.
He sat under the oak tree in the backyard, the one he had looked at through the kitchen window on the morning this all began, and he sat there for a long time. Amara saw him from the kitchen window. She said nothing. She let him have the space.
But she thought about fear.
She thought about the kind of fear that doesn't announce itself loudly. The quiet fear, the kind that lives in the stomach when you're a single mother with no safety net, working in someone else's house, knowing that the entire architecture of your child's stability depends on one person deciding to keep you employed. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of being too visible, of taking up too much space. She had lived inside that fear for 3 years. And on the morning of the second meeting day, she had chosen for one moment, in one sentence, to step outside of it. She had not done it for recognition. She had not done it to be seen or rewarded or thanked. She had done it because a 3-year-old had told the truth and she knew in her bones, that the truth needed to go somewhere. That it couldn't just be swallowed back down into the invisible spaces where people like her were supposed to live. She had done it because she was her daughter's mother. And mothers carry their children's truth into rooms where children cannot go. That evening, Marcus came back inside. He looked different. Not broken, never broken. But different in the way that people look when something has genuinely reached them. When a thing has gotten past the defenses and the calculations and the practice surface and touched something real underneath. He found Amara in the kitchen. She was making Lily's dinner, something simple, something warm, something that smelled like the home they carried inside themselves wherever they went. Lily was at the small table in the corner, drawing. As always. Head bent, crayon moving, utterly absorbed. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at Lily. She looked up. Her brown eyes were calm and curious. "Hi," she said simply.
"Hi," he said.
She looked at him for a moment with that searching, unself-conscious gaze that children use, The gaze that sees without filtering, without social editing, without the layers of learned behavior that adults pile on top of every interaction. Then she looked back down at her drawing. And somehow that was exactly right. No ceremony. No dramatic moment. Just a little girl returning to her crayons, having said everything she needed to say days ago with 2 words that had changed everything. Marcus looked at Amara. "I need to speak with you," he said. "Not tonight, I know it's late and Lily needs dinner. But tomorrow. There are some things I want to change." She held his gaze. "Of course." He nodded. He looked at Lily one more time, that small, bent head, the crayon moving steadily, and then he went back to his study. Amara turned back to the stove. Her hands were steady. Her breath was slow. But something inside her chest had shifted. Some tightly held thing that had been braced for a long time had begun, very carefully, to release. She didn't know yet what tomorrow would bring. But she knew, for the first time in a long time, that being seen was not something to be afraid of. Not always. Not by everyone. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, being seen was the beginning of something better. The conversation happened the next morning in the kitchen over coffee. Marcus sat at the counter, not at the formal table, not in the meeting room, not in the study. In the kitchen, where the light came in warm and the house smelled like coffee and something ordinary and human. He sat like a person, not like an employer. And he asked Amara to sit down, which she did, carefully, as if she wasn't quite sure she was allowed to occupy a chair that way in front of him. He started simply. He told her that what she had done, speaking up in that meeting room, had taken courage that he hadn't seen in a long time. Not the dramatic kind of courage. The harder kind. The kind that requires you to override every instinct that tells you to stay safe, stay small, stay invisible. He told her that he had been running his home and his life with a certain kind of blindness that he wasn't proud of. That he had treated the people around him, the ones who made the daily rhythm of his life possible, as infrastructure rather than as people. That this was something he intended to change. Amara listened. She didn't interrupt. He told her about the changes he was making to the deal. He was pursuing legal action against Daniel Cross and had already reported the scheme to relevant authorities. Victor Stahl's firm was under review. His lawyers were confident that they could recover damages and that the incident would not go unresolved. Then he told her about the changes he was making closer to home. Her salary would be adjusted, significantly, to reflect the actual value of her work and her time. Lily would have access to a private school nearby. He had already looked into it, and there was a spot available for the fall. He was establishing a formal employment contract with Amara, one that included benefits, stability, and protections that should have existed from the beginning. He wasn't doing it as a transaction.
He was very careful about that.
He said it plainly. This was not payment for what she had done. What she had done was not something that could be paid for. This was a correction of what had always been wrong, and what he had simply never bothered to look at clearly before. Amara sat with her hands around her coffee cup. She felt the warmth of it against her palms. She thought about the morning she had arrived at this house for the first time. One bag, one dream, a 5-month-old daughter strapped to her chest. She thought about the first week, when she had moved so quietly through these rooms that she sometimes felt genuinely unsure whether she existed in them. She thought about all the dinners she had cooked and all the floors she had cleaned and all the mornings she had risen before the light came to make sure that everything was in order for a life that was not her own. And she thought about Lily. Always Lily. The little girl who had grown up in the corners of someone else's world and developed, in those corners, a quality of seeing that the center of the world couldn't match. The quiet child with the enormous brown eyes who had walked into a room full of money and power and performance and simply said the thing that was true. "I have one question," Amara said. Marcus waited. "The school you mentioned." She set down her cup. "Will she be happy there?" Something crossed his face, something that might, in a different light, have looked like warmth. "I visited it this morning," he said. "They have a garden. She can grow things." Amara looked at the table. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. Okay, she said. It wasn't a grand moment. It didn't come with music or a dramatic shift in the light. It was just a woman sitting at a kitchen counter, accepting, for the first time in a long time, that things could be better. That better was allowed. That she didn't have to hold herself small in order to stay safe. That day, when Lily woke up from her afternoon nap, Amara told her that she might be going to a new school in the fall. A school with a garden. Lily considered this with the gravity of a diplomat reviewing treaty terms. "Can I bring my bear?" she asked. "Of course you can." "Okay." And she went back to her drawing. That was all. That was everything. In the weeks that followed, the house changed in small but real ways. Marcus noticed things he had not noticed before. He said good morning with his eyes, not just with his voice. He remembered things, that Lily liked butterflies, that Amara took her coffee without sugar, that there were days when the weight of everything showed quietly in the set of Amara's shoulders, and those were days when he made sure not to add to it. He was not transformed overnight into a different kind of person. That's not how people work. He was still driven and intense and absorbed in his work in ways that left little room for much else. But he had been reached. And being reached, being genuinely touched by something true, something unexpected, something that came from the very last place you thought to look, that changes a person in ways that are slow and real and don't always have a visible shape. He had been reached by a 3-year-old with a stuffed bear who saw things clearly because nobody had told her yet that she wasn't supposed to. And by the woman who had raised that child alone, in silence, in someone else's world, carrying a dream across an ocean and keeping it alive in the corners where nobody thought to look. Fall came. The oak tree in the backyard turned gold, and then copper, and then let its leaves go, one by one, into the cool air. The mornings got shorter. The kitchens smelled different, warmer, somehow more lived in. Lily started school. She wore a blue backpack that was almost as big as she was, and she carried her stuffed bear tucked inside it, the worn ear sticking out of the zipper just slightly. On the first day, she walked through the gate without looking back, no clinging, no tears, no hesitation. Just those enormous brown eyes taking in the new world with the same quiet, steady attention she brought to everything. Amara stood at the gate for a long moment after Lily disappeared inside. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief. Not the cautious, provisional okayness of someone who has managed to survive another season. Something fuller. Something that settled in the chest and stayed. She thought about everything that had led to this morning. The ocean crossing. The early years. The silence she had learned to inhabit. The job that had kept them alive. The little play corner in the corner of a meeting room. The crayon drawing with the dark scribble over the tallest figure. The man who talks wrong. She almost smiled. 3 words from a child. 3 words that had traveled from a 3-year-old's uncomplicated heart, through a room full of money and deception, into the ears of a man who had almost been destroyed by the very trust he extended. 3 words that had changed 2 lives. Maybe 3. Because Marcus had changed. Slowly. Genuinely. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in the way that real change always moves, quietly through daily choices, through small decisions to see a little more clearly, to look a little more honestly at the world immediately around you. He had expanded Lily's school sponsorship into a broader commitment, a scholarship program in partnership with a school that would help other children from similar circumstances access the same quality of education. He hadn't announced it publicly. He hadn't made a press event out of it. He had simply done it. Because something in him had shifted, and when something genuinely shifts in a person, it tends to want to move outward. Amara returned to the house after dropping Lily off. She made coffee. She moved through the familiar rhythms of her morning. She was still the woman who worked in this house. That hadn't changed. She didn't need it to change. The work had never been the problem. She had always been someone who found meaning in doing things well, in making a space run smoothly, in being capable and reliable and present. What had changed was the weight of invisibility. She was no longer invisible. Not to the man whose house she worked in. Not to herself. She had walked into a meeting room and said a sentence that terrified her, and the sentence had mattered, and she had survived it, and more than survived, she had been seen.
Truly seen.
That is a rare and irreversible thing. Once it happens, there is no going back to the before. In her small room, on the wall above the dresser, Lily had taped up one of her drawings before she left for school that morning. 3 figures again, the same 3 figures she always drew. But this time there were no dark scribbles. This time all 3 figures had small, simple smiles. Amara stood in the doorway of the room and looked at it for a long moment. Then she went downstairs to start the day. Outside, through the kitchen window, the oak tree stood bare but alive. All its leaves given up, roots still deep, waiting for spring the way it had waited for every spring before this one. Patient, present, unshaken. Some things endure by being exactly what they are. And some truths, the small, clean, inconvenient ones that children tell in doorways, they endure the same way. Not because they are loud, but because they are real. And real things have a way of outlasting everything that tries to bury them. This story began with a little girl who said 2 words. He's lying. And it ends here with you. Because you watched this all the way through. And that means something. It means this story found you for a reason. Maybe you have been Amara, the one who works in silence, who sees everything, who carries the weight of a dream alone, and keeps going anyway. If that's you, I want you to hear this. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Even when the room is full of power and you feel like furniture. Especially then. Maybe you have been Marcus, someone who was moving too fast to look at what was right in front of them. Someone who had to almost lose everything to finally see clearly. If that's you, it's not too late. It is never too late to see the people who have been there all along. And maybe, just maybe, you have been Lily. Someone who saw the truth clearly because nobody told you not to. Someone who said the thing out loud because it needed to be said.
Hold on to that.
The world will try to teach you to stay quiet. Don't let it. Not completely. If this story moved you, if something in it sat with you, made you think, made you feel, please subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me which part stayed with you. Tell me what story you want to hear next. Because this channel exists for you. And there are so many more stories waiting. Stay with us.